The thriller genre has been at the heart of classic and contemporary cinema for decades, from the early work of Alfred Hitchcock to the mind-bending cinematic masterpieces of Christopher Nolan. In 2019, the thriller genre grossed over $1.2 billion, but why are audiences so drawn to it? Arguably, the first thriller ever made was Harold Lloyd's 1923 film Safety Last, a rudimentary silent film featuring a daring stunt in the heart of New York. Although the special effects, cutting edge at the time, thrilled audiences, it was arguably more action than thriller. However, in 1927, Alfred Hitchcock released his first thriller film, The Lodger, the first of its kind to make film psychological. Alfred Hitchcock, often referred to as the master of the thriller genre, realised that if he knew how his audience was feeling at any point in time whilst watching his films, he could use that to his advantage. He could control his audience. He based his films around events that affected the public at the time. The Lodger, produced only 30 years after Jack the Ripper's reign of terror, meant the concept of a serial killer was still fresh, and he knew that the thought of it would scare his audience. In 2004, scientists at the American Association for the Advancement of Science conducted an experiment where they observed the brain activity of 5 individual participants watching 30 minutes of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly under an fMRI machine. To their surprise, a large extent of the participants' human cortex reacted almost identically in unison to the film. In a follow-up study, scientists compared the brain responses of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly to that of 3 other videos presented to another group of participants. An episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, an episode of Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm, and an out-of-context video of Washington Square Park, a segment from reality. The comparison clearly shows that Alfred Hitchcock's Bang You're Dead had the biggest impact on the brain, with on average 65% of the human cortex being used, followed by Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad and the Ugly at just over 45%, and Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm at 19%, with a segment in reality barely scraping 3% of the brain's attention. This study is an example of what is called neurocinema, and the film industry invests millions every year into this technology. But how did Alfred Hitchcock manipulate and orchestrate the minds of his audience so perfectly before this technology had even existed? Hitchcock used the thriller genre to create a heightened sense of reality. He created a cinematic roller coaster in which the mind is constantly thinking. Probably the most interesting way he has been known to do this was in his film Psycho. In the last scene of this classic hit, for a split second when it fades from Norman Bates to the car sinking, you can see the overlay of his mother's skull laid on top of his face.
Well, let them see what kind of a person I am. I'm not even going to swat that fly. I hope they are watching. They'll see. They'll see and they'll know. And they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
For the release of his film in 1960, this transition was only printed on some of the films sent to cinemas. This meant it triggered a conversation among the audience afterward, leading to more exposure for the film. However, most of his work comes down to deciding what the audience can see. His use of carefully selected shot types meant that he could infer meaning to his audience when intercut with a context shot. This is called the Kuleshov effect, named after the Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov, who, in the early 1910s, carried out an experiment where he cut a film of a man with a neutral expression with different clips. When the man looked at the soup, the audience thought he was hungry. When he looked at the dead child, the audience thought he was sad. However, when he looked at the woman, they thought he was overcome with lust. Even though in every clip, the shot of the man remained the same. Here is Alfred Hitchcock explaining this effect in his own words.
The assembly of film and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
Or you for it.
In my opinion, Hitchcock's best example of the Kuleshov effect is in his 1936 film Sabotage, where he uses multiple clips to create a sense of foreboding. He cuts to an innocent boy on the bus stroking a puppy. However, that intercut with a close-up shot of a package gives an eerie sense of, what's in the box? Also, the cutaway shot of a clock creates a sense of time passing. The audience is anticipating that something bad is about to happen. The time between each cut decreases exponentially, creating a deep sense of suspense. Suddenly, the package explodes on the bus, and the audience is left with a sense of shock. The use of Kuleshov is an art form, and Alfred Hitchcock uses it beautifully. The fact he chose to show the child and the puppy means that the audience is left with a cathartic, somber feeling, as the audience is imagining what happened to them. Are they perhaps dead? Hitchcock then adds to this by cutting away from the scene entirely. Let's fast forward to the 21st century. Till this day, the pioneering work of the master is still relevant, with many great directors preserving the legacy of the thriller genre. Christopher Nolan, Brad Anderson, Harlan Coben, just to name a few. To see how Hitchcock and Kuleshov's filmmaking techniques have carried throughout cinema history, let's look at this scene from Christopher Nolan's 2014 film Interstellar, where Cooper and the rest of his crew land on a water planet in search of a new place for humanity to inhabit.
130% Earth gravity. There's nothing here. Should be right here.
There's signals coming from here. For beacon.
Wreckage. Where's the rest?
Towards the mountains!
Those aren't mountains. They're waves.
As you can see, there are clearly a lot of similarities between this scene and the scene from Hitchcock's Sabotage. When the crew leaves the ship for the shallow water, Nolan cuts to a large object in the distance. Like in Sabotage when it cuts to the package on the bus, this is providing enough information for the audience to assume that something is going to happen.
Brand Doyle, back to the Ranger now.
We're not!
Furthermore, to test if these techniques still work on a modern audience, I conducted my own experiment into neurocinema. Similar to the one conducted by scientists, I wanted to compare when audience members would react to a clip from a contemporary thriller. For this experiment, I will get each of my participants to press a button whenever they think there is a moment of suspense, anxiety, or foreboding when watching a clip from Ian Brennan and Ryan Murphy's The Watcher.
Hey, can I just ask what's going on here? Why you're in my garden? Well, I'm Dean.
And this is Mitch, and I'm Maureen. My friends call me Mo.
Big Mo.
And we were wondering if you could get your daughter to stop playing that piano.
We're buying a keyboard, maybe with some headphones.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry. I don't really understand because, you know, my wife and I, we can't get her to play that thing.
And to answer your question that you practically shouted, we are doing what we've done for the past 20 years, which is getting in our vitamin D and harvesting the wild arugula that grows along the
We used
fence.
to call it rocket. Now it's all French. Got to call it arugula, or else they're racist or some PC bullshit like that.
Okay. Look, you are on my property.
To make my audience demographic fair, I compared the results of 3 male participants and 3 female participants to achieve a dataset that more accurately represents the series' intended audience. Once all the data was collected and analysed, it was then processed into a graph comparing the moment in which each participant pressed their button. The x-axis in this graph represents time, in video timecode, and the y-axis referring to P as participant. As you can see from the diagram above, there are strong similarities between each of the participants. All participating audience members all reacted in unison from the 2 to 3 minute mark. This is when our protagonist meets their neighbours for the first time.
Hey! Can I just ask what's going on here? Why you're in my garden?
But why is this? Perhaps a correlation can be drawn between the increase in data and the drastic change in tone when talking to the neighbours.
All I'm doing is harvesting the arugula that I planted and is migrated from my side of the fence.
Oh, yeah, well, can you just pick the arugula that's growing on your side of the fence?
I just told you it migrated to this side of the fence!
Quite quickly, the tone transitions between a light-hearted chat to a confrontational exchange about what the previous owners allowed the neighbours to do.
Would you pick?
Basic fucking horticulture, friend.
To verify my hypothesis, I interviewed my participants after having completed the experiment. I asked 2 questions. At what point in the clip was the most suspenseful, and did you feel like the clip was foreboding anything? And here is what they had to say.
I think just after they've sort of had the discussion about the fruits, and then sort of the man behind the fence cutting the apple puts his knife down on the log.
Point where the female neighbour walked up to him and said that she was going to be watching him for different reasons and couldn't be his friend.
Definitely when the lady started getting a bit annoyed at her neighbour because she was picking the flowers and everything.
When the woman walked up to him and was pretty close to him.
Do you think that scene was foreboding anything? And if so, what did you think it was foreboding?
I think it sort of shows, I think especially in the dialogue and the music, I think it sort of forebodes it. It's not going to be sort of the last time that they see each other, and it's going to get a lot worse.
I mean, I definitely think it was. I haven't personally seen the series, so I don't really know what, but I imagine that they're going to get quite thoroughly stalked.
I think it could be foreboding that the neighbours are going to be involved again, definitely in the story. The way they're watching him constantly and the subtle threats that I think were made within the conversation, it definitely almost alluded to we're going to meet again, but maybe on not so nice terms.
Yeah, I do. I feel like something bad's going to happen to him or his daughter, or from the 2 people we saw in the clip.
Overall, most of the responses were fairly similar, suggesting that the sudden confrontational tone was the most suspenseful given the context of the scene. In conclusion, it is clear that the original work of Kuleshov and Hitchcock still translates well today, and can be seen across many contemporary thriller films. These conventions are heavily embedded within the fabric of cinema, and are likely to be used for years to come. The psychological effect the thriller genre has on audiences expands far beyond anything I can cover in one video. However, it is clear that through the data that we analysed, the thriller genre is one of the most effective mediums at manipulating the viewer on an emotional level. If you would like to see my sources for yourself, a link to my bibliography will be available in the description below, along with the experiment used in my primary research. Thanks for watching the video.